Hello, I'm Kelly Hyman, and welcome to a new episode of Unresolved, the Diddy cases. Let's welcome Scott A. Johnson, a forensic psychologist. He has specialized in addressing sexual predators for over 35 years. He is also the author of books including Physical Abusers and Sex Offenders, Forensic Consideration and Strategies, and When I Love You Turns Violent. Let's welcome Scott Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about the Diddy trial. Based on what you've heard so far, what witnesses help substantiate the alleged abuse of these women?
Well, specifically, of course, his exes, people that he's dated, and without naming all the names, everyone's told similar stories, and that's the important piece, I think, here is that it's not one person saying something; it's multiple people that have been intimately involved that have said same and similar things.
So let's talk first about the star witness for the prosecution, and that is Cassie Ventura, Diddy's ex-girlfriend. Now, there is some argument made that she was in fact consenting to these, as she calls it, freak-offs. How, from a psychological standpoint, when there appears to be conflicting messages, text messages from her saying that she enjoyed doing them, to what actually she really wanted from a psychological perspective?
Well, I think the difficult piece is she may well have wanted something intimate or sexual with Diddy, but it's very apparent from her testimony as well as others that things were way out of control and that people did not really have consent. And, consent implies you can walk away. And when we're being forced, coerced, tricked, when we have photographs being used against us of various sex acts or videos, um, and when we're certainly under the influence of drugs, and not just alcohol, but drugs, we're not in a place to really say stop or no. And so the whole psychological piece of, well, I'm attracted to this man, I'm attracted to the fame, but he's also my paycheck. He can end my career as well as possibly my life. There were certainly insinuations of force threats. The whole scenario that she was describing, I think, boxed her in to what we might refer to as similar to the Stockholm syndrome, where a victim has been gaslighted enough, abused enough with the do this or else, but then I love you and things like that, that they may well sound like some of it they liked, but they really that's more of a psychological construct of how do I survive this because I cannot just walk away. And I think the video in the hotel was just the most black and white example of the terror and fear and the inability to escape this man.
But why couldn't she just walk away? The counter argument is, if you're in this abusive relationship, why not just leave?
Well, again, you've got a psychological tie to the person. It may well have started out very pleasant, being very rewarding, and of course, your career. um, but when things start going ugly, we get to a point where if we could psychologically just walk away, we probably would. But that's a small, small number of victims that just walk away. Most are still terrified of this person. And I believe what we've heard throughout the trial is that what Sean Combs wanted, Sean Combs got. And if you tried to walk away, there was going to be a price to pay. And not feeling safe to do that, it's a lot easier to just stay where you're at and endure and hope that there's more drugs, because at least that numbs to some degree the violence that happens to your body.
But eventually, she did walk away after 10 years. So, to be devil's advocate, why did it take 10 years for her to walk away? And at that point, she eventually did.
Well, I really believe it's about how the brain works. And again, we started out with something that was romantically positive and career positive that turned unexceptionally the worst it could ever be. It was sadistic and it was very threatening. And so taking time for victims, or I'm sorry, victims that take time to walk away, it's because it takes an amount of time to build up the courage, but also to accept the fact that if I walk away, I may be dead, I may be harassed, I may be whatever. But they're just at that breaking point where enough is enough. And or there was simply an opportunity to get away that was taken advantage of.
How does someone build up the will to be able to walk away?
Well, I think some of it is just if the brain's reached that point of breaking, that I've had enough. What the hell am I doing? I cannot do this anymore. Um, and or we don't know what the open doors were of people that may have been supporting her to walk away, because what we've heard is a heck of a lot of psychological intimidation. You did not go against Sean Diddy Combs, and there were enough henchmen and women that took care of business for him. So you needed to fear that. So I don't know that we'll ever know all of why she finally broke away. But when enough is enough and you realize you cannot survive this anymore and it's not what you want and the door opened for an out, you take it.
Do you believe when she was on the witness stand that she had the signs? What she said was someone who was in fact abused?
Yes, and we can misinterpret all day long. I train law enforcement too with, what are we looking for truth from deception? And we're accurate half the time, right? And so there were still some parts I'm sure her brain was struggling with at the beginning when I loved this man, at the beginning when things were good. Our tapes still play. And then you look at the ugly, and part of it is as you talk about the ugly side, the violent side, the rape side, all of a sudden you're like, oh, my God, that's me. And there's that final realization that I am a victim, and recognizing finally I'm scared enough, but I can get away. If we go back to the hotel room tape, that was a brazen, strong woman to do that. She ran, even though the likelihood of her escaping to that elevator and getting down was slim. But there was that breaking point. Enough is enough. And unfortunately, with the drug use that was alleged, um, victims aren't going to be able to fight or refuse. If we talk hypnotic drugs, if we talk about the anesthesia drugs, if we talk about just combining marijuana with ecstasy and other things, we're talking about impacts on the brain where people are not likely able to fight back. But she did. She ran. There was enough in the brain. She saw an opening and she fled. But the reality was she didn't get far. And so that just reinforced the I cannot safely run. I damn well better start saying nicer things. Yes, I want this. Yes, I don't. Well, uh, probably no one in their right mind would want the violence part. People can have different sexual appetites with consenting partners. But the minute we put force or extortion or threats into that, it's no longer a consenting relationship.
Why didn't she go to the police and tell them about this abuse, do you think?
Again, this has to do with all the allegations of the terror, the threats, the extortion and blackmail. I mean, having photos and videos of someone in compromising positions and allegedly even showing those to all of your coworkers or other people, who do you trust? And so to go to the police means if someone finds out, I still have to go home that night. Am I going to be safe? And with all due respect to law enforcement, probably not safe because someone would have to be with her probably 24/7 while it was investigated or her placed into a safe location, which define that. And when you've got people coming to look for you. The other side of it is, as someone who's interviewed a hell of a lot of sadists, psychopaths, as well as victims, what is believable or not? And when we start hearing what I would consider more egregious, sadistic sexual acts, most people go, come on, that didn't happen. You liked it. You were well, when you look at the entirety of the allegation, no, the average person wouldn't like it. And if you're drugged, things are foggy in the brain. At what point did I say yes? And we got you on tape saying yes. Well, yeah, I'm drugged. Of course I'm saying yes. So there's a believability factor that victims have to also look at as, will they believe me when I'm talking about something so egregious that this famous, well-liked person allegedly did to me? And we can look at other cases where that played a role too. Jerry Sandusky out of Penn State, certainly, his reputation and Penn State's reputation, and yet he's convicted of over 40 counts of child sex molestation. But it's that believability fear and safety fear that I believe keeps people from coming forward. And what evidence do you have with you? So the average victim may take hours, days, weeks, and sometimes months to come forward, which means what actual evidence do we have that something happened?
Talking about evidence, Diddy is charged with sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Do you believe that the prosecution has proved the claim? And if so, what is the basis and how did they do that?
Again, as a non-lawyer, um, I believe they have. And, when we start importing people from across state lines, that bumps things up from my non-legal expertise to a federal offense because now we're crossing state lines. We're paying people to come across state lines. We're getting our drugs transported across state lines to use his little drug case allegedly. And so um, it appears that that piece has been met. I mean, we're bringing people in. It's not we're just paying the neighbor to come and have sex with someone. We're actually bringing people across state lines. And then certainly if we start to look at, whether or not it was a business would be a question for the lawyers to figure out, of course, but certainly it was organized. And, I believe he is psychopath traded, if not psychopath, in that he just didn't care. He didn't care if people saw it, knew it. He had enough people to cover it up, and they're just, it just didn't care. And so I believe they met criteria for, again, you're paying people for sex work across state lines, and you know what, you're bringing drugs into it, which means the alleged partners are really not partners because once drugged, they cannot change their mind. And even if they did, and I think Cassie and others have talked, there was pain, there was humiliation, there was soreness, and yet they were not able to stop. So probably the case, I believe, would be met for for the interstate sex trafficking, and I forget the other charge, but was it an official business? Again, is something to deal with the attorneys, definitely, legally. But
And you stated that you believe he's a psychopath. Is that correct? Or sociopath?
well, based on what we've heard, and again, not convicted of it yet, but if he is convicted of things involving these themes that we're hearing from victims, that's a sexual sadist. And sadists are psychopaths with a need to hurt people sexually. So, um, the acts that are alleged, I couldn't say a better word than just egregious. Wasn't causing a little pain, it was causing pain. Wasn't causing a little humiliation, it was just egregious humiliation with the photos, the videos, the number of sex partners per occasion. And then to me, that's egregious desire to cause pain, suffering, or humiliation, or all three, which is about sexual sadism.
How does Cassie Ventura, some would say that she is a survivor, get through something like this?
Well, there's a handful of people that do it on their own just with support people. Okay. Um, most of the time, however, we need a professional that is trained in working with victims of specific crimes. So in this case, finding a therapist that understands the psychological control and the gaslighting, where one minute we're smashing you in the face, the next minute we're giving you kudos and a hug. Someone that understands the overall picture of how severe that was, but also to add someone that understands that sexual component, because to verbally or physically assault someone, most people understand the impact. We talk sex abuse and rape and repeated orgies, call it what, the freak offs, whatever. Um, that's a difficult thing, I think, for therapists to understand. And so, again, with an experienced, up to date, competent therapist, she'll get fine. She'll get through it just fine. And the reason is because she's blaming him now, not herself so much. That's a big hurdle, to not say it's my fault. I should have walked away, when in fact you couldn't. You weren't psychologically ready. And quite frankly, it wasn't safe. I mean, again, go back to the elevator instance. She did try to escape and she failed. And then that's broadcast all over the news. So talk about another victimization, right? Um, so, with appropriate help and support of family, friends, and colleagues, people do get over this hurdle. We can say we might have been broken at the time, but over time we become dented and then a little less dented. And so, to move on and learn to trust yourself again with the support people around you.
Why do the survivors, someone like Cassie, blame herself for being in that situation? Is it because she didn't leave, or is it something that she thinks that she deserves it? How does that work?
Well, I would argue that, again, when we get into the falsehood of the relationship of, I love this person, they're spoiling me rotten, I love the attention. And again, let's not forget the power of a career or breaking that career. Okay. And so when people, it's that love hate thing. I hate what's being done, but over time, I've blamed myself for not leaving. And as a person starts to address that victimization and realizing it's not my fault. If you love me, don't rape me. If you love me, why would I have sex with 10 different people? If you love me, why do I need to be drugged to be sexual? Right. And so, and the threats, just the intimidation component of not knowing who do I go to, and if I go to someone, what happens next? And so, learning to deal with that piece and finally just saying, I've had enough, I need to leave. It's an interesting point you make, because do victims sometimes do something stupidly risky? Yeah. You invited someone over to your house you just met on Match.com. right? Not an endorsement for Match.com. But the thing is, then you're raped that night in your home for someone you just met. Is it the victim's fault? And you know what? Engaging in a risky behavior doesn't justify the violent crime. It still took a rapist to rape. And in this case, getting to the point of not blaming yourself for staying because you didn't really have a choice that appeared safe to you psychologically, career wise, physical safety wise, humiliation wise. And if we look at what happened to one of her friends, he assaulted her too. He didn't care. He's brazenly an abusive, controlling man. Now, one of my friends was assaulted. And so, finally having the strength to say, regardless of what, I need to tell people.
Let's talk about Mia. Mia is a former employee of Diddy, was his assistant, and she alleges that she was raped by Diddy. Why would someone who, in Diddy's position, a music mogul, well off financially, a lot of girls would want to be with him, rape his assistant?
Again, assuming this is true, what we've heard for allegations, that's a sexual psychopath, or at least a psychopath. And we start adding sadism onto it when we get aroused to the pain, suffering, or humiliation of that person. And so we get to that point of narcissism. We get to the point of when we start talking psychopathy, we start talking about people with either a significantly diminished sense of fear and anxiety or an absence of it, which means you're more brazen. I can do what I want when I want. And every time you get away with it because a victim didn't report it, or the victim reported it, but timeline didn't allow for prosecution, right? That just emboldens the person. And so it becomes a game. I can do what I want fairly in the open. And you start involving multiple people. I'd call that in the open because the risk of a leak or something is always high, but you just don't care. And I think, when I listen to Diddy's, I hate calling him Diddy, I hate glorifying the nicknames, but for sake here, to listen to Diddy's apology of, I did something wrong. And quite honestly, he just lied through that. There were no tears, there was no sincere look on a face that I'd expect of someone that really feels shamed by their behavior, right? And he never mentioned names. I'm sorry for hurting you, Cassie. I'm sorry for the way now I get legally why he wouldn't say that on a tape, but at the same time, a lot of that prosecution has come and gone, right? Time frame wise. So, why not just come clean if you really felt what you did was wrong? And so, yeah, he just doesn't care.
Do you believe that rape is not the sexual act, but more a sense of power and control? And if so, why is that?
Well, we can look at the five main motives for rape, okay? Power, anger, control, revenge, and prerogative. And many of our rapes involve three, four, five of those. And you could add on to those, but those are the main pieces. So the power piece of making someone do what you want, the average person wouldn't get aroused to that. If your partner was saying no, but you're horny, but you can see something's wrong, you stop, you talk because you care about the person. So the power piece goes away. For the rapist, it doesn't. The control, just making sure that there's not an out for the person, is no different, in my opinion, than hunting, where you're trapping your prey and you're going to hurt your prey, right? And so, but jumping to the last one, simply the prerogative to do this, that's emboldenment that took time to practice in the brain with fantasy to get to the point of putting it into behavior. So that emboldenedness, I have a right to. You asked for this. You led me on. You owe me. I have a right to do this. And I think that that sense, especially a prerogative, is so strong for these offenders. And the downside is, less than 40% of rape victims report in a timely fashion, if at all. Well, that means the prosecution rate for the rape is only about 27% success rates, because out of that 40% or so that report, there's not often evidence, right? Because they didn't report right away. Now, of those that do report right away, that's one thing. But as we start to report later, this, I've said this as I train law enforcement, prosecutors, child protection, the sex offenders and batters are smarter than us to the degree they're the ones getting away with it. We know the average sex offender has 8+ victims, not one. We could say for child molesters, that's 8 times 3 to 100 per one we know that they've gotten away with, because minors tend not to report the crime anyway for 5 to 10 years, which means from a prosecutor standpoint, not likely you're taking the case because there's probably not any evidence other than the word, right? And so perpetrators know victims won't report right away, is my point. They count on it. If they're damaged enough, if they're injured enough, if they're afraid enough, they're not going to report it for a week or two at best, if they do at all, which means after that time, where's the physical evidence? So the perpetrators think about that. They're aware of that. And if we think about the allegations here against Diddy, again, hasn't been found guilty of these things, but the allegations would certainly imply that brazenness, that he just doesn't care about the consequence. He's Diddy, he gets away with it, and when he can't get away with it, he'll make it right in some way, or his goons will, his followers will. Right. And so the brazenness also, if I throw it in here, yeah, of showing these freak offs, and I'd still call them rapes, because if you're under the influence of the drugs, you're not able to stop. And Cassie and others said, I wanted to stop at points and it wasn't allowed. Of course not, because that wasn't part of the scheme. There was no place to escape to, right? But if you think about why would you show that to people allegedly at parties, allegedly to others who knew the victim professionally? Why would you risk prosecution or people turning on you for showing what you did to that person? He didn't care. He didn't care. Allegedly showing the pictures of the freak offs or rapes to other celebrities. Why would you do that unless you just didn't care? You felt you were too powerful to touch.
Is there anything else in regards to Mia from a psychological standpoint that you think our viewers should know?
Well, again, she was an employee, and so there's that position of power and authority. There's certainly, she struggled with this. To have that job was a job of a lifetime, right? A famous man, a good-looking man, a rich man, someone that could make even your career working for them highly lucrative. And so to have things become violent and now you're a victim of it, it takes so much time to kind of accept that I've been a victim by someone I looked up to, and that I've been a victim by someone public looks up to. So compassion for her and Cassie and others, compassion for the victims, that they struggled with this two-sided man. We've got the professional, nice social persona, and then we've got the monster within, and the struggle to finally come forward also means that the alleged victims are now at a place to accept they've been a victim. And that takes time for strong people.
And there's no easy cure for that, correct?
Well, I would say, cure is probably the wrong word, because the resilience, right? How do we take the damaged car and make it better again. Well, we pound out some dents, we come to grips with what happened. Most important, the more we talk about it and make it real and get over that pain that really was me. I really was a victim, and I don't have to be that person anymore. And so we can get to that point where we're moving on happily, where we can look someone in the eye and say, here's what happened to me, and it wasn't my fault. I think that's the biggest thing for victims, is to be able to talk about it with their head held high, to say, it really wasn't my fault. I may have went back, I may not have reported it, but there were so many terror pieces that prevented me. Now there's not.
Is there anything else in regards to Cassie Ventura, one of Diddy's ex-girlfriends, that you think our viewers should be aware of or should know in regards to the situation that she experienced?
Well, I think, again, just to understand that victims um, do often have justified love and respect feelings for their perpetrator, because it didn't just start today. It started several weeks or months into that relationship. So to have someone say, I liked some of this, I didn't like some of it, yeah, well, how much did she really like? Because she didn't have a choice. But if she stays with the man, she has to like it. And that's a catch 22. And I have to justify I like it because I like this man, even though I know it's wrong. So it's the struggle victims go through when we have power thrust upon us, and we have fear of our safety and our friends' safety. So I would say, give her a break. There's something that she may have liked, but it certainly wasn't being raped. It wasn't being humiliated. It wasn't being chased down a hall and beaten. It wasn't being isolated. Wasn't having her friends assaulted. I mean, there were so many negatives, but victims, in struggling with trying to accept they've been a victim, oftentimes highlight the good and ignore the bad as long as they can till they reach that breaking point.
You talk about choice, and I see that as a theme for the defense in regards to the women, his ex-girlfriends, that in fact they made a choice and ultimately they could leave at any point or walk away, that ultimately they had free will to make a decision, and they decided in fact to choose to stay. How do you reconcile the choice versus, no, I did not agree to that?
Well, I think, again, to what we start talking, at what point was a person a willing, compliant party to whatever we choose to do? Um, Number one, we can get in over our heads and have regrets, and therefore, based on those regrets, choose to end the relationship or not do that again. But there's that draw of power here, and the allegations of a draw of power and threats, but also the potential for retaliation. And so to say I kept coming back, you must have liked it. Well, uh, trying to struggle with, why does this person I care about hurt me? And trying to hope that there's a life preserver, that he or she really does like me, right? They're going to stop doing this. Um, but the longer you stay, the more abused you get. And so, free will, I think, is complicated, because if you start adding even the potential of coercion, threats, harm, humiliation, that really does start to chip away at, why did you keep coming back? Well, because I didn't really feel I had a choice. But there's also one other caveat. I don't know that it's been played up enough. And it's like, once we get the drugs in our system, we're not compliant. It's my understanding of the law, because I've been involved with cases for rape, that yes, we started kissy face before we got drunk, and then after we're drunk, I took it further. But that's not what you wanted. But yeah. Well, the problem is, um, once we're intoxicated, or once we're under the influence of more powerful drugs, we don't, in my opinion, have free will anymore because how many of them did say, I wish I could have stopped this, or I tried to stop this but was unable? Right, because you're in the situation. But if you don't come back, what is the potential for harm? Right. And again, it's alleged that there were threats, intimidation, humiliation, but those are pretty powerful motivators to keep coming back when you know you don't want to come back. But again, once we're high, we're not under the ecstasy or other drugs. Um, we're really not in a place to safely say no. And quite frankly, we're not understanding how to, because if we talk high strengths of THC, we talk about scolpapine or other hypnotic drugs that people use that basically make us a slave because we're not going to say no to anything, even though at the back of our brain screaming stop. So once we're under the influence, even if I chose to take the drug, that doesn't mean I'm saying do whatever the hell you want with me. And I think that's a piece people don't understand. So, yes, you chose to get high with your buddies, but that wasn't asking to be raped by these people, right? Two different things.
Jane Doe, she's going by a pseudonym, is Diddy's ex-girlfriend, was his girlfriend from 2021 through 2024. How is she different from Cassie Ventura and Mia, or is she in fact the same?
I would just say the same, everything on a continuum. So for the fear, maybe a little different place. For the, could I have walked away safely? Maybe, maybe not, in a little different place. But I think the overall dynamic that's coming out through the allegations is that he's a pretty scary man. And so to not cooperate meant your career's probably over. To walk away probably wasn't an option that felt safe. And I'm sure if you talk to your friends or others, they would say, be careful, right? Leaving a perpetrator is the most dangerous time because the perpetrator then knows you're leaving and therefore they may kill you. They may seriously hurt you worse. And so, again, sort out, could someone have just walked away, or why did was someone successfully able to walk away? If they were successful at getting away and Diddy left them alone, then it's because he simply had no more use for them.
From a psychological standpoint, are there certain characteristic traits of a woman such as Cassie Ventura or Mia or Jane Doe that allegedly has someone prey upon them and prey upon their weaknesses so that they are in these types of situations?
Well, we could certainly look for people with dependency issues or unresolved victim issues, things like that. But I would say more strongly, most people that are like what Diddy's accused of doing, that do that kind of thing, they prefer people who are more independent, more assertive, because part of the process is to break them, to chip them down to the point where they're not going to walk away. And so the humiliation, I would argue, of showing the tapes of sex acts or having repeated people keep having sex with you when you don't want to, it's chipping away at the very morals of that person. Why am I here? I can't walk away. What the hell did I get into? So, part of that power, in my opinion, once we start talking psychopath traded, sadistic traded, is you want the strongest person so that over time you can break them. So, no, I mean, the essence is probably he wanted the people that were least likely to sit back and let it happen so that he could break them and make them sit back and let it happen.
That's fascinating. So, from a psychological standpoint, based on the allegations, what character traits would you say that Diddy is or that he has, and if so, why? Whether it's being narcissistic or something else.
Well, again, based on what we've seen in the public eye and their allegations, so we're not going to cross that line. But the allegations are of someone that's psychopath traded, and part of that means the brain's broke. We're at a place where either we have zero fear and anxiety, or um, we could be a secondary psychopath broken by the environment where our brain rewires, where we still experience fear and anxiety, but our response to that is arousal. And so, whether you have no fear or anxiety, or whether you're aroused to it, either way, fear and anxiety are not going to stop you from doing what you do. And so, that brazenness, that narcissistic piece, that turn on to power, but also a turn on to the sadism part. I mean, he's hurting these people, not just humiliating. There's physical damage that's done that I'm sure many of them have not necessarily talked about, but we could imagine is likely there. And so there's more to this. The problem with the traits, once we start talking sadistic, psychopath, they're not treatable because the brain rewires. If we do a PET scan of a psychopath's brain, and all sadists, in my opinion, are psychopaths, if we do that PET scan, we can see the damaged parts of the brain. And damage to the brain, you can't come back from. It's not like a heart valve. You go in, you replace a valve or a liver. We can't fix that. And so psychopaths basically are whatever trajectory they take. If they're the Bernie Madoff, fine. Between 5 and 12 years old, they're already extorting people. But if they've started with violence, physical or sexual or psychological, that is the trajectory for life. It doesn't go away. There is no stopping it. Why? The brain's broke. We can't fix that. You can't teach conscience to a conscienceless brain. And so I think the misunderstanding of psychopathy and sadism is also part of the problem, that people don't understand it's an untreatable, brain is broken thing.
Is there anything else that you think our viewers would want to know or you like to share with us in regards to the Diddy trial?
Well, I think to always be aware that when we hear about such cases that are getting all the press, and we're dealing with an alleged perpetrator who is famous and likable, and all we do is see the good in them, and then we admire them because they're rich and everything else, that does taint our view of the case. And to sit back and say, even if I like them, that doesn't mean that they aren't the monster that they're being accused of. And the reason is, how many times have any of the viewers saw on TV a cops episode or something where a neighbor's being arrested, and you're saying, I never saw that. They were always nice to me. Yeah, but behind closed doors, the monster comes out. And so we don't often see these horrendous things. And by the time they come out, it's usually 10, 15, 20 years of it before we even become aware of it, before there's a strong enough case to prosecute. So just be aware that whether we like or dislike the alleged victims, that doesn't mean they're telling a lie. And because they stayed, that doesn't mean they liked it. If we're not feeling safe to leave and we're feeling confused, we don't. For the public, look, it's like having a job you're not sure about, but you need the paycheck. So you keep going back, but you're not happy. And maybe at some point you move on. And for if we added violence onto that, that you weren't allowed to move on because of a risk of harm, that's what I want you to keep in mind for these victims, alleged victims.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being on the show. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Unresolved, the Diddy cases. Stay tuned for our next episode.